In the scorching heat of a Mesopotamian summer in 1922, British archaeologist Leonard Woolley's trowel struck something extraordinary beneath the ancient mounds of Ur, sending reverberations through the archaeological world that would fundamentally transform our understanding of human civilization itself. As fragments of cuneiform tablets emerged from the earth like whispered secrets from humanity's earliest writers, their wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay nearly 5,000 years ago by hands that belonged to the world's first urban dwellers, the Sumerians, whose sophisticated society arose in the fertile valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers during the 4th millennium BCE, establishing the foundational elements of civilization that would echo through millennia and across continents. From their revolutionary invention of writing and the wheel to their complex legal systems and monumental architecture, creating a cultural legacy so profound that virtually every aspect of modern urban life can trace its origins back to these ancient innovators who transformed the marshy lowlands of southern Mesopotamia into humanity's first great cities, where temple towers called ziggurats pierced the sky like artificial mountains, where scribes recorded everything from grain transactions to epic poetry on clay tablets that would survive the collapse of empires, where kings ruled with divine authority, while merchants traveled vast trade networks that connected the known world, and where ordinary people lived lives of remarkable complexity, worshipping dozens of gods, following sophisticated laws, and participating in an economy that utilized the world's first known form of money. All of this emerging from archaeological layers that reveal a gradual but revolutionary transformation from simple farming villages to complex urban centers that would serve as the template for civilization itself, with each excavation season uncovering new evidence of Sumerian innovations in mathematics, astronomy, literature, and governance. From the world's earliest known schools where young scribes learned to write on practice tablets that still bear their teachers' corrections, to the royal cemetery of Ur, where Queen Puabi was buried with a golden headdress of such exquisite craftsmanship that it rivals any treasure from later civilizations, to the thousands of administrative documents that reveal the intricate workings of temple economies where priests managed vast agricultural estates, redistributed goods according to complex hierarchies, and maintained detailed records of everything from sheep counts to silver payments, creating an unprecedented window into daily life in humanity's first cities, where Sumerian farmers developed irrigation systems of such sophistication that they transformed arid landscapes into agricultural paradises capable of supporting populations, and the tens of thousands where craftsmen working in specialized workshops produced goods of extraordinary quality using techniques that would be refined and passed down through generations, where women could own property, run businesses, and serve as priestesses with significant religious authority, and where children played with toys remarkably similar to those found in modern playgrounds, suggesting that despite the vast temporal distance separating us from these ancient people, fundamental aspects of human nature remain constant across the millennia. Though the Sumerians lived in a world where the boundary between the natural and supernatural was far more permeable than in our modern understanding, where dreams were considered messages from the gods, where every aspect of life was governed by divine will as interpreted by priests, who maintained elaborate calendars based on lunar cycles and predicted the future through examination of animal entrails, where the king was not merely a political leader but a representative of the gods on earth, whose primary responsibility was to maintain cosmic order through proper ritual observance and just governance, creating a worldview in which individual identity was inseparable from community membership and divine favor, expressed through participation in religious festivals that could last for days and involved entire populations in elaborate processions, ritual meals, and ceremonial reenactments of mythological events that explained everything from the changing of the seasons to the origins of humanity itself. Stories that were preserved not only in religious texts but also in the world's earliest known works of literature, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, which explored timeless themes of friendship, mortality, and the search for meaning through the adventures of a legendary king of Uruk, whose quest for immortality led him across the known world and into the realm of the gods themselves, reflecting sophisticated philosophical concepts that would influence religious and literary traditions for thousands of years, while simultaneously revealing practical details about Sumerian society, from descriptions of city walls and palace architecture to accounts of trade expeditions and diplomatic relations with neighboring peoples, all preserved in cuneiform script that represents one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements, transforming abstract thoughts into permanent visual symbols that could be read by anyone who mastered the system, thereby creating the first true democracy of ideas where knowledge could be preserved, transmitted, and accumulated across generations, leading to increasingly sophisticated developments in mathematics, where Sumerians invented the sexagesimal system still used for measuring time and angles, in astronomy, where they identified and named most of the constellations visible in the northern hemisphere, in medicine, where they compiled the world's first known pharmacological texts describing treatments for dozens of ailments, and in law, where the Code of Arnamu established legal precedents that would influence jurisprudence throughout the ancient Near East, creating an intellectual foundation upon which all subsequent civilizations would build, though the Sumerians themselves would eventually fade from political prominence as Semitic peoples gradually assumed control of Mesopotamian cities. Their cultural influence would prove so enduring that Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian rulers continued to use Sumerian as a liturgical language for over 1,000 years. After the last Sumerian dynasty fell, much as Latin continued to be used in medieval Europe, ensuring that Sumerian religious concepts, literary themes, and scientific knowledge would be preserved and transmitted to later civilizations. From the ancient Hebrews whose flood narrative bears striking similarities to Sumerian accounts, to the classical Greeks whose philosophical traditions were ultimately rooted in Mesopotamian speculations about the nature of reality and the human condition, to modern societies whose urban planning, legal systems, and educational institutions still reflect organizational principles first developed in Sumerian cities like Uruk, and Eridu, where archaeological excavations continue to reveal new aspects of this foundational civilization, including recent discoveries of Sumerian texts that have expanded our understanding of their literature, religion, and daily life, while advances in scientific dating techniques and environmental analysis have provided increasingly precise reconstructions of the climatic and ecological conditions that enable Sumerian civilization to flourish in a region that is now largely desert, demonstrating the crucial role that environmental factors played in shaping human cultural development and highlighting the remarkable adaptive capacity of early urban societies that learned to thrive in challenging conditions through technological innovation, social cooperation, and religious systems that provided both practical guidance for agricultural timing and spiritual meaning for human existence in an uncertain world. The archaeological record reveals that Sumerian civilization emerged gradually from earlier Neolithic cultures during the Uruk period, roughly 4000 to 3100 BCE, through a process of increasing social complexity and technological innovation that transformed scattered farming villages into the world's first true cities, with this transformation most clearly visible in the material culture recovered from stratified excavations at sites like Uruk, where German archaeologists working throughout the 20th century uncovered layer after layer of increasingly sophisticated remains, from simple pottery and stone tools in the earliest levels to elaborate temple complexes, administrative buildings, and residential quarters in later strata, revealing a society that grew in complexity as it grew in size, with population estimates for Uruk during its peak suggesting an urban center of perhaps 50,000 inhabitants, making it by far the largest settlement in the world at that time, supported by an agricultural hinterland that extended for miles in every direction and was connected to the city through a network of canals, roads, and satellite communities that provided specialized products and services. From fishing villages along the Persian Gulf to pastoral nomad groups who supply livestock and dairy products, to mining communities in the distant mountains, who extracted metals and precious stones that were transformed in urban workshops into luxury goods for both local consumption and long-distance trade, creating an economic system of unprecedented complexity that required new forms of social organization, record-keeping, and governance, leading to the development of specialized occupations and social hierarchies that are clearly reflected in the archaeological evidence, from large residential complexes that obviously house wealthy families to smaller, more standardized dwellings that suggest the existence of a substantial middle class of skilled craftsmen, merchants, and lower-level administrators, while the poorest members of society lived in cramped quarters that nonetheless provided access to clean water, paved streets, and sewage systems that were remarkably advanced for their time, indicating that even in its earliest forms, urban civilization required sophisticated infrastructure and social services that benefited the entire population, though certainly not equally, with clear evidence for marked disparities in wealth and status that were justified through religious ideologies that portrayed social hierarchy as divinely ordained and necessary for maintaining cosmic order, concepts that were expressed through elaborate burial practices where the graves of wealthy individuals contained dozens of precious objects, while common people were interred with simple pottery and personal ornaments. Yet even these modest burials reveal careful attention to proper ritual treatment of the dead, suggesting that Sumerian religious beliefs emphasized the importance of every individual's soul, regardless of social status, while simultaneously maintaining that earthly inequalities reflected divine will and cosmic necessity, creating a worldview that could accommodate both social stratification and universal human dignity, expressed through religious practices that included both exclusive ceremonies restricted to priests and nobles and public festivals in which entire communities participated as equals before the gods, with archaeological evidence for these religious activities found throughout Sumerian sites in the form of temple complexes that dominated urban landscapes, serving not only as places of worship but also as economic centers, where priests managed vast agricultural estates, craft workshops, and trading operations that generated the wealth necessary to support monumental architecture, maintain large staffs of religious personnel, and sponsor the artistic and literary achievements that made Sumerian civilization so remarkable. From the world's earliest known sculptures and reliefs depicting religious scenes and historical events to the thousands of literary texts that preserved mythological narratives, hymns, prayers, and wisdom literature that provided both entertainment and moral instruction for literate audiences, though literacy itself was restricted to a small percentage of the population, who had undergone the lengthy training necessary to master cuneiform script, with most scribes being men from wealthy families who attended schools attached to temples or palaces, learning to read and write through copying exercises that began with simple word lists and gradually progressed to complex literary compositions, mathematical problems, and legal documents, creating an educated elite whose services were essential for the functioning of increasingly complex urban societies that generated vast quantities of written records, documenting everything from property transfers and business contracts to court proceedings and diplomatic correspondence, with many of these documents survived because they were inscribed on durable clay tablets that, when properly baked, could last for millennia under the right conditions, providing modern archaeologists with an unprecedented window into ancient life. Though interpretation of these texts requires not only linguistic expertise but also deep understanding of Sumerian cultural contexts, religious beliefs, and social structures, areas where archaeological evidence provides crucial supplementary information about daily activities, living conditions, and material culture that help scholars understand the meaning and significance of written sources, revealing a civilization that was both remarkably sophisticated in its intellectual achievements and recognizably human in its basic concerns with family, property, justice, and spiritual meaning, expressed through artistic traditions that combined technical mastery with profound religious symbolism. From massive temple sculptures depicting gods and goddesses with elaborate costumes and ceremonial objects to tiny cylinder seals that were rolled across clay, to create distinctive impressions serving as personal signatures and amuletic protection, demonstrating the integration of practical and spiritual concerns that characterized every aspect of Sumerian life, where even the most mundane activities like bread baking or beer brewing were surrounded by religious ritual and connected to mythological narratives about divine origins, creating a cultural system where technological innovation and spiritual development reinforced each other and generating increasingly sophisticated approaches to fundamental human challenges like food production, social organization, and environmental adaptation. Challenges that became particularly acute as Sumerian cities grew larger and more complex, requiring ever more elaborate solutions that pushed the boundaries of existing knowledge and technical capabilities, leading to remarkable innovations in hydraulic engineering, architectural design, metallurgy, textile production, and agricultural management that not only sustained growing urban populations, but also generated sufficient surplus wealth to support monumental construction projects, artistic patronage, and the maintenance of large numbers of non-productive specialists including priests, scribes, administrators, and craft workers whose activities contributed to cultural development rather than immediate material survival, creating conditions that enabled the flourishing of intellectual and artistic traditions that would influence human civilization for thousands of years. Though the Sumerians themselves could hardly have anticipated the long-term significance of their innovations, being primarily concerned with immediate challenges of survival, prosperity, and spiritual fulfillment in a world they understood as governed by powerful and often unpredictable deities whose favor had to be constantly courted through proper ritual observance, generous offerings, and moral behavior, concepts that were codified in legal traditions that established standards for ethical conduct and provided mechanisms for resolving disputes, maintaining social order, and ensuring that justice prevailed over arbitrary power. Principles that were embodied in royal inscriptions where Sumerian kings described themselves as shepherds of their people, responsible for protecting the weak, providing for the needy, and maintaining the divine order upon which prosperity and security depended, creating a political ideology that emphasized royal responsibility rather than royal privilege. Though certainly these ideals were not always realized in practice, as evidenced by texts documenting corruption, oppression, and social conflict, revealing that Sumerian society faced many of the same challenges that confront complex societies in every historical period. From economic inequality and political instability to environmental degradation and external threats, issues that required constant attention and innovative solutions from leaders who possess both practical administrative skills and spiritual authority derived from their role as intermediaries between human and divine realms. During the early dynastic period, approximately to 900 to 334 BCE, Sumerian civilization reached its first great flowering as independent. States like Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, and Eridu established themselves as major centers of political, economic, and cultural power, each controlling surrounding agricultural territories through networks of canals, roads, and fortified outposts that enabled them to support substantial urban populations while maintaining sufficient military forces to defend against external threats and compete with neighboring cities for access to trade routes, water rights, and territorial expansion, a competitive dynamic that is extensively documented in royal inscriptions, administrative archives, and archaeological evidence from this period, revealing a complex political landscape where individual rulers sought to expand their power and prestige through military conquest, monumental construction, and religious patronage, while simultaneously needing to maintain delicate balances between competing social groups within their own cities. From powerful temple establishments with their own economic interests and political agendas to wealthy merchant families, whose trading activities generated much of the wealth that funded royal ambitions, to craft guilds whose specialized skills were essential for producing the luxury goods that served as symbols of power and objects of religious devotion, to agricultural laborers whose surplus production made urban life possible, but who had little direct political influence despite their fundamental importance to the entire system, creating social tensions that required constant negotiation and occasionally erupted into conflicts that are documented in legal texts describing property disputes, labor strikes, and political conspiracies. While the overall trajectory of Sumerian development during this period was toward increasing sophistication in all areas of cultural achievement, from architecture, where temple complexes became increasingly elaborate and incorporated innovative design elements like buttresses, recessed panels, and decorative mosaics, to sculpture, where artists developed increasingly naturalistic techniques for representing human and divine figures while maintaining the symbolic functions that made these works religiously and politically meaningful, to literature, where scribes composed increasingly complex narratives, hymns, and wisdom texts that explored fundamental questions about human nature, divine justice, and cosmic order through stories that combined entertainment with moral instruction, creating cultural traditions that would influence literary development throughout the ancient Near East and beyond, while simultaneously serving practical functions in education, where young scribes learned proper language and moral values through copying and memorizing classical texts and religious ritual, where hymns and prayers provided frameworks for community worship and individual devotion, and in political propaganda, where royal narratives established legitimacy and justified specific policies or military actions, though the boundaries between these different functions were rarely clear-cut, since Sumerian thought did not make sharp distinctions between secular and religious domains, viewing all aspects of life as interconnected parts of a cosmic order, maintained through proper relationships between gods and humans, rulers and subjects, and communities and their natural environments, relationships that required constant attention and periodic renewal through elaborate festivals that brought together entire populations in celebrations that could last for days and involved dramatic reenactments of mythological events, ritual processions through city streets, communal meals featuring specially prepared foods, and ceremonial exchanges of gifts that reinforced social bonds while honoring the gods, whose continued favor was essential for community survival and prosperity. Festivals that also served important economic functions by providing occasions for trade, craft, production, and the redistribution of wealth through temple offerings and royal generosity, creating integrated systems where religious, social, and economic activities reinforced each other in maintaining community cohesion and cultural identity. Though these same systems could also become sources of conflict when different cities competed for regional dominance or when changing environmental conditions disrupted established patterns of production and exchange, leading to the warfare that became increasingly common during the later early dynastic period, as growing populations placed greater pressure on available resources while climate changes may have made agricultural production less predictable, forcing cities to compete more aggressively for access to fertile land and reliable water supplies. Conflicts that are documented in royal inscriptions celebrating military victories, and administrative texts recording the capture and distribution of booty, and in archaeological evidence for fortification walls, weapons production, and destruction layers at contested sites, revealing a world where cultural sophistication coexisted with endemic violence, and where technological innovations were applied as readily to warfare as to peaceful pursuits. With Sumerian cities developing increasingly effective military technologies including bronze weapons, horse-drawn chariots, and siege equipment that would revolutionize ancient warfare, while also refining diplomatic practices that enabled them to form alliances, negotiate treaties, and establish trading relationships that could provide alternatives to military confrontation, creating a complex international system where power was balanced not only through force, but also through economic interdependence, cultural exchange, and shared religious traditions that provided common ground for communication and cooperation between otherwise competitive political entities, systems that worked reasonably well as long as environmental conditions remained stable and population growth did not exceed the carrying capacity of available resources, but which became increasingly strained as Sumerian civilization matured and faced new challenges from both internal development and external pressures, including migrations of Semitic peoples who brought different cultural traditions and political organizations, climate fluctuations that affected agricultural productivity, and the gradual depletion of soil fertility caused by intensive irrigation, agriculture that led to salinization and reduced crop yields over time, environmental problems that required increasingly sophisticated management techniques, and may have contributed to the eventual decline of Sumerian political independence, though their cultural achievements would prove more durable than their political institutions, surviving the conquest of Sumerian cities by Akkadian rulers, who recognized the value of Sumerian learning and incorporated many Sumerian practices into their own administrative and religious systems, ensuring that Sumerian innovations would continue to influence Mesopotamian civilization long after the last Sumerian dynasty had fallen, and political power had passed to other peoples, who nonetheless continued to venerate Sumerian cultural traditions and preserve Sumerian knowledge for future generations. The religious and mythological systems developed by the Sumerians represent perhaps their most profound and lasting contribution to human culture, establishing conceptual frameworks for understanding the relationship between divine and human realms that would influence religious thought throughout the ancient world and continue to resonate in modern spiritual traditions, with archaeological evidence for Sumerian religious practices found in temple complexes that dominated urban landscapes from the earliest periods of city development, revealing sophisticated theological concepts expressed through architectural symbolism, ritual performances, and artistic representations that conveyed complex ideas about cosmic order, divine authority, and human responsibility, ideas that were codified in mythological narratives preserved in thousands of cuneiform tablets that describe the origins of the universe, the activities of gods and goddesses, and the proper relationships between divine and mortal beings. Stories that served multiple functions as entertainment, moral instruction, ritual guides, and explanatory frameworks for natural phenomena, social institutions, and historical events, creating comprehensive worldviews that provided meaning and structure for individual lives, while justifying existing social hierarchies and political arrangements through divine sanction. Though these same narratives also contain elements of critique and questioning that acknowledge the complexity and ambiguity of human existence, in a universe governed by powerful but not always benevolent supernatural forces. Themes that are particularly evident in compositions like the Epic of Gilgamesh, which explored the tension between heroic aspiration and mortal limitation, through the story of a legendary king whose quest for immortality ultimately led to acceptance of human finitude and appreciation for the values of civilization, friendship, and cultural achievement that make mortal life meaningful despite its ultimate transience, reflecting sophisticated philosophical insights that were embedded within narrative frameworks, accessible to audiences who might not have been interested in abstract theological speculation, but who could appreciate dramatic stories about gods and heroes, whose struggles paralleled their own experiences with love, loss, ambition, and disappointment, making Sumerian literature both intellectually sophisticated and emotionally resonant in ways that ensured its continued popularity long after the political circumstances that produced it had changed beyond recognition, with scribes throughout Mesopotamia continuing to copy, study, and adapt Sumerian myths and legends for over 1,000 years after the fall of the last Sumerian dynasty, ensuring that these stories would influence the development of later religious and literary traditions from ancient Israel to classical Greece, while simultaneously serving practical functions in Sumerian society as educational texts that taught proper language and moral values to young scribes, as liturgical materials that provided frameworks for temple worship and seasonal celebrations, and as political tools that legitimized royal authority by connecting earthly rulers with divine prototypes and cosmic principles, functions that required theological systems capable of accommodating both transcendent spiritual ideals and immediate practical needs, leading to the development of complex pantheons, where individual deities represented specific aspects of natural and social reality, while also embodying universal principles that applied across different domains of experience, creating religious frameworks that were simultaneously polytheistic in practice and monotheistic in underlying structure, since all individual gods were understood as manifestations of a fundamental cosmic order that ensured justice, prosperity, and meaning for those who lived in harmony with divine will. Concepts that were expressed through elaborate ritual systems that involved entire communities in seasonal celebrations, daily offerings, and life cycle ceremonies that marked important transitions, like birth, marriage, and death, while also providing opportunities for individual prayer, meditation, and spiritual development through personal relationships with patron deities who offer protection, guidance, and blessing in exchange for devotion, proper ritual observance, and ethical behavior, creating religious experiences that were both communal and individual, both practical and transcendent, both conservative in preserving traditional values, and innovative in adapting to changing circumstances. Characteristics that enable Sumerian religious traditions to maintain their vitality and relevance across many centuries of political and social transformation, while also making them attractive to foreign peoples who adopted Sumerian practices, adapted Sumerian myths, and incorporated Sumerian theological concepts into their own religious systems, ensuring that Sumerian contributions to human spiritual development would extend far beyond the geographical and temporal boundaries of Sumerian civilization itself, influencing the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam through shared concepts of divine justice, human responsibility, and cosmic order, while also contributing to the development of philosophical traditions that sought to understand the fundamental nature of reality through rational inquiry combined with spiritual insight, creating intellectual legacies that continue to shape contemporary discussions about the relationship between science and religion, individual freedom and social responsibility, and the meaning and purpose of human existence in a vast and often incomprehensible universe. Questions that the Sumerians addressed through mythological narratives and ritual practices that affirmed both the grandeur of divine reality and the dignity of human life, establishing conceptual foundations upon which later civilizations would build increasingly sophisticated theological and philosophical systems, while never entirely losing touch with the fundamental insights about divine transcendence and human finitude that were first articulated in the temples and schools of ancient Sumer, where priests and scribes preserved and transmitted wisdom traditions that would prove more enduring than the political institutions they served and more influential than the military conquests they celebrated. The economic foundations of Sumerian civilization rested upon revolutionary innovations in agricultural technology, craft production, and commercial organization that enabled these ancient cities to support populations of unprecedented size and complexity, while generating sufficient surplus wealth to fund monumental architecture, artistic patronage, and the maintenance of large numbers of non-productive specialists whose activities contributed to cultural, rather than material development, with archaeological evidence revealing sophisticated irrigation systems that transformed the arid landscapes of southern Mesopotamia into agricultural paradises, capable of supporting tens of thousands of people through coordinated management of water resources that required unprecedented levels of social cooperation and technical expertise, involving the construction and maintenance of networks of canals, dikes, and reservoirs that channeled flood waters from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers across vast areas of previously unusable land, creating artificial ecosystems that were both highly productive and extremely vulnerable to disruption, requiring constant attention from specialists who understood the complex relationships between water flow, soil conditions, crop timing, and seasonal variations, knowledge that was preserved and transmitted through both written records and practical apprenticeship systems that ensured continuity of essential skills across generations, while also generating detailed archives that documented everything from water rights and canal maintenance to crop yields and harvest distributions, creating unprecedented quantities of economic data that reveal the intricate workings of ancient agricultural systems based on collective labor, shared resources, and centralized coordination through temple and palace administrations that manage production, storage, and distribution according to complex hierarchies of need, merit, and social status. Systems that were both remarkably efficient in maximizing agricultural output and inherently unstable due to their dependence on environmental conditions beyond human control, leading to periodic crises when floods, droughts, or other natural disasters disrupted normal production patterns and forced communities to rely on stored surpluses, alternative food sources, or assistance from neighboring cities, creating needs for emergency management procedures, risk assessment techniques, and intercity cooperation agreements that represent some of the earliest known forms of disaster planning and mutual aid. While the overall success of Sumerian agriculture created conditions that enabled the development of specialized craft industries that produced goods of extraordinary quality for both local consumption and long-distance trade, with archaeological excavations revealing workshops where skilled artisans working with bronze, gold, silver, precious stones, fine textiles, and exotic materials created objects that combine technical mastery with artistic sophistication, demonstrating levels of specialization that would have been impossible in less complex societies, where most individuals needed to focus on subsistence activities, but which became feasible in urban environments where agricultural surpluses could support large numbers of people engaged in non-food production, creating conditions that fostered technological innovation, artistic experimentation, and the development of increasingly sophisticated techniques for working with different materials, knowledge that was preserved and transmitted through guild systems that regulated training, maintained quality standards, and protected trade secrets, while also facilitating the exchange of ideas and techniques between different craft specializations, leading to cross-fertilization that accelerated technological development and enabled Sumerian artisans to achieve remarkable feats of engineering and artistic expression, from delicate jewelry that required microscopic precision to massive architectural projects that demanded sophisticated understanding of structural principles, hydraulic engineering, and construction management. Achievements that were made possible not only by technical skill but also by economic systems, capable of mobilizing the human and material resources necessary for complex projects. Systems that depended heavily on long-distance trade networks that connected Sumerian cities with sources of raw materials throughout the ancient Near East and beyond, from timber and stone quarries in distant mountains to mining regions that supplied metals and precious stones, to pastoral areas that provided wool and leather, to coastal regions that offered shells, fish, and other marine products, creating commercial relationships that extended across hundreds or thousands of miles. and required sophisticated techniques for transportation, communication, and financial management, including the development of standardized weights and measures, written contracts, credit systems, and dispute resolution procedures that enabled merchants to conduct business with partners they might never meet face-to-face. Innovations that were necessitated by the geographical limitations of Mesopotamia, where many essential resources were simply not available locally and had to be obtained through trade, but which also created opportunities for Sumerian merchants to serve as intermediaries in commercial networks that connected diverse regions and peoples, generating profits that funded urban development while also facilitating cultural exchange that enriched Sumerian civilization through contact with foreign ideas, technologies, and artistic traditions, creating cosmopolitan environments where innovation flourished through the cross-fertilization of different cultural traditions. Though these same trade relationships also created vulnerabilities when political instability, climate change, or other disruptions interfered with normal commercial activities, forcing Sumerian cities to develop alternative strategies for obtaining essential resources, or to accept reduced living standards when certain imported goods became unavailable. Challenges that required increasingly sophisticated approaches to economic planning, resource management, and international relations that pushed the boundaries of existing knowledge and institutional capabilities, contributing to the gradual evolution of more complex political structures, capable of coordinating large-scale activities across extended periods of time and geographical space, developments that would ultimately transform not only Sumerian society, but also the broader patterns of human civilization through the establishment of precedents and innovations that would influence economic development for thousands of years. The legal and administrative systems developed by the Sumerians established fundamental precedents for governance, justice, and social organization that would influence political development throughout human history, with archaeological evidence revealing sophisticated approaches to law, administration, and dispute resolution that balance individual rights with community needs, while providing mechanisms for maintaining social order, protecting property, and ensuring that power was exercised according to established principles rather than arbitrary personal preference. Innovations that were necessitated by the complexity of urban life where large numbers of people with diverse interests and backgrounds needed to coexist peacefully and productively, requiring rules and institutions that could regulate behavior, resolve conflicts, and coordinate collective activities in ways that seemed fair and legitimate to all members of society. Challenges that led to the development of legal codes that established clear standards for acceptable behavior, while specifying punishments for various offenses, creating predictable consequences that enabled individuals to make informed decisions about their actions while providing authorities with consistent guidelines for maintaining order and administering justice. Principles that were codified in documents like the Code of Irrinamu, which represents one of the earliest known attempts to create comprehensive legal frameworks based on written law rather than customary practice or arbitrary royal decree, establishing precedents for due process, proportional punishment, and equal treatment that would influence legal development throughout the ancient world, and continue to shape modern jurisprudence through concepts of legal precedent, written law, and judicial review. Those Sumerian legal systems were also deeply embedded in religious worldviews that understood human law as reflecting divine justice, and royal authority as deriving from divine appointment, creating frameworks where earthly justice was expected to mirror cosmic order and where violations of human law were also understood as offenses against divine will. Concepts that provided powerful ideological support for legal compliance, while also creating expectations that rulers would govern according to moral principles, rather than simple self-interest, expectations that were expressed through royal inscriptions where Sumerian kings described themselves as shepherds responsible for protecting their people, especially the weak and vulnerable, and as agents of divine justice charged with maintaining cosmic order through proper administration of earthly affairs, creating political ideologies that emphasize royal responsibility rather than royal privilege, while simultaneously justifying existing social hierarchies through divine sanction, balancing acts that required considerable political skill and religious authority, leading to the development of complex administrative systems that could manage the practical details of governance while maintaining the symbolic and ceremonial functions that legitimize political authority. Systems that are extensively documented in archives containing thousands of administrative texts that reveal the intricate workings of ancient bureaucracies, where scribes maintain detailed records of everything from tax collection and military service to public works projects and religious ceremonies, creating unprecedented quantities of documentation that not only facilitated effective administration, but also provided transparency and accountability that helped prevent corruption and abuse of power, though these same systems could also become burdensome and inflexible when bureaucratic procedures took precedence over practical problem solving, or when administrative complexity made it difficult for ordinary citizens to navigate official processes, problems that required ongoing attention and periodic reform to maintain effectiveness and legitimacy, leading to continuous evolution in administrative practices as Sumerian cities experimented with different approaches to governance, taxation, military organization, and public services. Innovations that were driven both by practical necessities and by ideological commitments to justice, efficiency, and divine approval, creating dynamic tension between tradition and innovation that fostered institutional development while maintaining cultural continuity. Processes that were facilitated by educational systems that trained skilled administrators who understood both practical techniques and underlying principles, ensuring that governmental institutions could function effectively across changes in leadership while adapting to new circumstances and challenges. Capabilities that proved essential as Sumerian cities grew larger and more complex, requiring increasingly sophisticated approaches to urban planning, resource management, and social coordination that pushed the boundaries of existing knowledge and institutional capacity, leading to innovations in everything from census taking and taxation to military organization and judicial procedure that established precedents for governmental development that would influence political institutions throughout human history, from ancient empires to modern nation-states, all of which would draw upon organizational principles and administrative techniques first developed in the city-states of ancient Sumer, where human beings first learned to create and manage complex governmental institutions capable of serving large populations while maintaining legitimacy through adherence to legal principles and moral values that transcended the immediate interests of those who held power, establishing foundations for the rule of law that remain central to contemporary discussions about governance, justice, and political legitimacy in democratic societies that continue to grapple with fundamental questions about the relationship between individual freedom and social order that were first addressed in the palaces and temples of Sumerian cities where priests, kings, and scribes developed the conceptual frameworks and institutional mechanisms that made complex civilization possible. The technological achievements of Sumerian civilization encompass a remarkable range of innovations that fundamentally transformed human capabilities and established foundations for technological development that continue to influence modern life. From their invention of the wheel and the sailboat to their development of sophisticated metallurgical techniques and their creation of the world's first known writing system. Innovations that emerged from practical necessities created by urban life and complex economic activities, but which had far-reaching consequences that extended well beyond their original applications, creating cascading effects that accelerated technological development and enabled increasingly sophisticated approaches to fundamental human challenges like transportation, communication, construction, and resource management. with archaeological evidence revealing the gradual evolution of these technologies through successive improvements and adaptations that demonstrate the cumulative nature of technological progress and the importance of cultural continuity in preserving and transmitting technical knowledge across generations. Processes that were facilitated by specialized craft traditions that maintain detailed understanding of materials, techniques, and applications through apprenticeship systems that ensure the preservation of essential skills while also encouraging innovation and experimentation, creating environments where technological development could proceed steadily through the accumulation of incremental improvements and occasional breakthrough discoveries that open new possibilities for further development, patterns that are clearly visible in the archaeological record through sequences of increasingly sophisticated tools, techniques, and products that reveal the progressive refinement of Sumerian technology over many centuries, with particular innovations having profound impacts on multiple areas of activity simultaneously, as when the development of bronze metallurgy not only improved weapons and tools, but also enabled new forms of artistic expression, architectural techniques, and mechanical devices that would have been impossible with earlier stone and copper technologies, creating synergistic relationships between different areas of technical knowledge that accelerated overall technological development, while also making Sumerian society increasingly dependent on specialized expertise and complex supply chains that required sophisticated organization and management, dependencies that created both opportunities and vulnerabilities as technological complexity increased and required ever more elaborate systems for training specialists, obtaining raw materials, and maintaining equipment, challenges that fostered the development of technical education, quality control procedures, and maintenance protocols that establish precedents for technological management that remain relevant in modern industrial societies. While the most fundamental Sumerian technological innovation, the development of cuneiform writing, had implications that extended far beyond its original purpose as a record-keeping system for temple and palace administrations, creating possibilities for preserving and transmitting knowledge that would transform every aspect of human culture, from law and literature to science and education, by enabling information to be stored, copied, and shared across time and space in ways that had never before been possible, making possible the accumulation of knowledge across generations and the development of increasingly sophisticated intellectual traditions that could build upon previous achievements, rather than starting over with each generation, capabilities that were essential for the development of complex legal systems, detailed historical records, sophisticated mathematical and astronomical knowledge, and literary traditions that preserve cultural wisdom while providing frameworks for continued cultural development, achievements that were made possible by the technical properties of cuneiform script and clay tablets that proved remarkably durable and practical for ancient conditions, combining permanence with portability in ways that made written communication feasible for a wide range of applications, from simple business transactions to complex literary compositions, creating a technological foundation that would support intellectual development for thousands of years while also establishing precedents for information technology that continue to influence modern approaches to data storage, information management, and knowledge preservation, though the full implications of writing technology would only become apparent over time, as successive generations found new applications and developed more sophisticated techniques for using written communication. Processes that demonstrate the often unpredictable nature of technological development, where innovations designed for specific purposes often prove to have much broader applications and more profound consequences than their creators anticipated. Patterns that are clearly visible in Sumerian technological history, where practical inventions like the potter's wheel and the plow led to developments in astronomy, mathematics, and engineering that would influence scientific progress for millennia, creating technological legacies that continue to shape modern civilization. in ways that connect contemporary life with the innovations of ancient Mesopotamian craftsmen, engineers, and inventors who first discovered the principles and techniques that would enable humanity to transcend the limitations of Stone Age technology and create the foundations for all subsequent technological development. The military organization and warfare practices of Sumerian civilization reveal sophisticated approaches to defense, conquest, and strategic planning that establish precedents for military development that would influence warfare throughout ancient history, with archaeological evidence from fortified cities, weapons caches, and battlefield sites demonstrating the evolution of increasingly effective military technologies and tactics that were driven by the competitive dynamics of city-state politics and the constant threat of external invasion from nomadic peoples and rival urban centers, creating pressures that forced Sumerian communities to develop professional military forces equipped with bronze weapons, protective armor, and specialized equipment like chariots and siege engines that gave them significant advantages over enemies still using Stone Age technology, while simultaneously requiring new forms of military organization, training procedures, and logistical support that transformed warfare from sporadic raids by part-time warriors into systematic campaigns conducted by disciplined armies capable of sustained operations across extended periods and geographical distances. Developments that are documented in royal inscriptions celebrating military victories, administrative text recording military expenditures and personnel assignments, and artistic representations depicting battle scenes, military equipment, and victory celebrations that reveal the central importance of warfare in Sumerian political, culture, and social organization, where military success was understood as essential for maintaining independence, protecting trade routes, securing access to resources, and demonstrating divine favor, creating powerful incentives for technological innovation and organizational development that push the boundaries of existing knowledge and capabilities, leading to remarkable achievements in metallurgy, engineering, and strategic planning that would influence military development for centuries, with Sumerian innovations in bronze weapons manufacturing creating tools of war that were both more effective and more durable than anything previously available, enabling the development of professional warrior classes who could train extensively with standardized equipment and develop sophisticated fighting techniques that required years of practice to master, while advances in chariot construction and horse training created mobile strike forces capable of rapid deployment and devastating attacks against infantry formations. Innovations that required not only technical expertise but also complex logistical systems capable of maintaining horses, repairing equipment, and supplying armies in the field. Capabilities that were made possible by the agricultural surpluses and craft specialization that characterized mature Sumerian civilization, but which also created new vulnerabilities when military campaigns disrupted normal economic activities, or when defeats resulted in the loss of expensive equipment and trained personnel that were difficult to replace. Challenges that encouraged the development of diplomatic alternatives to military confrontation, including alliance systems, tribute arrangements, and negotiated settlements that could achieve political objectives without the costs and risks associated with warfare. Though military strength remained essential for maintaining credibility in diplomatic negotiations and deterring aggressive behavior from potential enemies, creating complex strategic calculations that required sophisticated understanding of both military capabilities and political psychology, knowledge that was preserved and transmitted through military traditions that combine practical training with theoretical instruction in strategy, tactics, and leadership, creating professional military cultures that could maintain effectiveness across changes in personnel and political circumstances while adapting to new technologies and evolving threats. Adaptations that were facilitated by the competitive environment of Mesopotamian politics, where military innovation was constantly driven by the need to counter new threats and exploit new opportunities. leading to continuous development in weapons, technology, fortification design, and tactical doctrine that established patterns of military evolution that would continue throughout ancient history. With Sumerian military innovations like the phalanx formation, siege warfare techniques, and combined arms tactics being adopted and refined by successive civilizations that built upon Sumerian foundations while adding their own improvements and adaptations, creating cumulative traditions of military knowledge that connected ancient warfare with modern military science through continuous chains of innovation, adaptation, and refinement that demonstrate the enduring influence of fundamental strategic principles, first developed in the conflicts between Sumerian city-states, where human beings first learned to organize, equip, and deploy military forces on scales that required systematic approaches to training, logistics, and command that established precedents for military organization that continue to influence contemporary armed forces. Though the specific technologies and tactics have evolved dramatically, the underlying challenges of coordination, motivation, and resource management remain fundamentally similar to those first addressed by Sumerian military leaders who pioneered the development of professional armies, capable of achieving strategic objectives through disciplined application of organized violence in service of political goals, creating military traditions that would prove both remarkably effective and profoundly influential in shaping the subsequent development of human civilization. Through the establishment of empires, the spread of technologies, and the creation of political structures that depended upon military power for their creation and maintenance, the artistic and architectural achievements of Sumerian civilization represent extraordinary accomplishments in visual expression and monumental construction that established aesthetic principles and building techniques that would influence artistic development throughout the ancient world and continue to inspire architects and artists in the modern era, with archaeological excavations revealing sophisticated approaches to sculpture, painting, decorative arts, and architectural design that combine technical mastery with profound religious and political symbolism, creating works of art that served multiple functions as objects of beauty, expressions of religious devotion, statements of political power, and records of historical events, while simultaneously demonstrating levels of skill and creativity that required specialized training, expensive materials, and substantial investments of time and labor, indicating the high value that Sumerian society placed on artistic achievement and the sophisticated patronage systems that made such achievements possible, with temple complexes and palace buildings serving as major centers for artistic production, where skilled craftsmen working under royal or religious patronage created works that celebrated divine power, commemorated important events, and demonstrated the wealth and sophistication of their sponsors, creating artistic traditions that were both deeply rooted in Sumerian cultural values and open to influences from neighboring civilizations, leading to synthetic styles that combine local innovations with foreign elements in ways that enrich Sumerian artistic expression while also spreading Sumerian influences to other regions through trade relationships, diplomatic contacts, and cultural exchange, processes that are clearly visible in the archaeological record through the distribution of Sumerian-style artifacts across wide geographical areas, and the adoption of Sumerian artistic motifs by foreign artists and craftsmen, who adapted these elements to their own cultural contexts and aesthetic preferences, creating networks of artistic influence that connected diverse civilizations and facilitated the spread of technical knowledge, stylistic innovations, and symbolic concepts that would prove remarkably enduring, with Sumerian contributions to architectural design being particularly influential through their development of innovative construction techniques, decorative systems, and building types that establish precedents for monumental architecture throughout the ancient Near East, from the ziggurat form that inspired temple construction in many later civilizations, to specific technical solutions for problems like structural support, water management, and decorative integration that would be refined and adapted by subsequent builders who nonetheless relied on fundamental principles first developed by Sumerian architects and engineers, whose achievements were made possible not only by technical expertise, but also by sophisticated organizational systems capable of mobilizing the human and material resources necessary for large-scale construction projects that require coordination between different craft specializations, careful scheduling of work activities, and effective management of complex supply chains that brought materials from distant sources to construction sites where they could be transformed into finished architectural elements through processes that combine traditional techniques with innovative solutions to specific design challenges, creating buildings that were both functional and symbolic, serving practical needs while also expressing religious beliefs, political ideologies, and aesthetic values that made them meaningful to contemporary audiences and impressive to foreign visitors who carried news of Sumerian architectural achievements back to their home communities, spreading awareness of Sumerian capabilities while also creating demands for similar projects that would drive architectural development in other regions, though the specific forms and techniques varied according to local conditions and cultural preferences. The underlying principles of monumental construction, decorative integration, and symbolic expression established by Sumerian builders would prove remarkably influential, providing foundations for architectural traditions that would evolve continuously, but never entirely abandon the basic concepts first articulated in the temples and palaces of ancient Sumer, where human beings first learned to create built environments that could inspire awe, express complex ideas, and provide appropriate settings for the religious and political activities that gave meaning and structure to urban life, establishing precedents for architectural achievement that continue to influence contemporary building design through concepts of monumentality, symbolic expression, and decorative integration that remain central to architectural practice despite dramatic changes in building technologies, construction materials, and cultural contexts, demonstrating the enduring power of aesthetic principles first developed by Sumerian artists and architects whose creative achievements established foundations for artistic development that would prove more durable than the political institutions they served and more influential than the military conquests they celebrated, creating cultural legacies that continue to enrich human experience through their preservation in museums, their influence on contemporary artists, and their contribution to ongoing discussions about the relationship between art, society, and spiritual meaning that remain as relevant today as they were in the ancient world, where Sumerian creators first explored the possibilities and responsibilities of artistic expression. In complex urban societies, the decline and transformation of Sumerian civilization during the late 3rd millennium BCE resulted from a complex interaction of environmental, political, and cultural factors that gradually undermined the foundations of city-state independence, while simultaneously ensuring the preservation and transmission of Sumerian cultural achievements to successor civilizations that would build upon Sumerian innovations while adapting them to new circumstances and challenges, with archaeological evidence revealing multiple stresses that affected Sumerian society during this period, including climate changes that may have reduced agricultural productivity, increasing salination of irrigated fields that decrease crop yields over time, political instability caused by intensifying warfare between competing city-states, and growing pressure from Semitic populations who were gradually assuming greater political and economic influence throughout Mesopotamia, creating conditions that weakened traditional Sumerian institutions while opening opportunities for cultural synthesis, an adaptation that would ultimately prove more significant than political decline, since Sumerian learning, religious traditions, and technological innovations were eagerly adopted by Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian rulers who recognized the value of Sumerian civilization and incorporated Sumerian elements into their own administrative, religious, and cultural systems, ensuring that Sumerian contributions to human development would continue to influence Mesopotamian civilization for over 1,000 years. After the fall of the last Sumerian dynasty, with cuneiform script remaining the standard writing system throughout the region, Sumerian serving as a liturgical language in religious ceremonies, and Sumerian literary works continuing to be copied, studied, and adapted by scribes who preserved these texts even as political power shifted to other peoples, creating remarkable continuity in intellectual and cultural traditions, despite dramatic changes in political organization and ethnic composition. Processes that demonstrate the distinction between political dominance and cultural influence, showing how powerful ideas, effective technologies, and meaningful traditions can transcend the specific historical circumstances that produce them, and continue to shape human development across changes in political leadership, social organization, and cultural identity. Though the specific mechanisms through which Sumerian culture was preserved and transmitted varied according to local conditions and the interests of new rulers, with some elements being maintained almost unchanged while others were significantly modified or combined with foreign elements to create synthetic traditions that serve new purposes, while preserving essential continuities with the past. Adaptations that were facilitated by the practical value of Sumerian innovations in areas like administration, law, technology, and education, where proven techniques and accumulated knowledge provided obvious advantages for anyone seeking to govern complex societies effectively, creating incentives for cultural preservation that went beyond mere antiquarian interest or religious conservatism to include practical considerations about administrative efficiency, technological capability, and educational effectiveness, factors that ensure the continued relevance of Sumerian culture even under foreign rule. While the gradual integration of Sumerian and Semitic traditions created new synthetic cultures that were neither purely Sumerian nor purely Semitic but rather represented creative combinations of different cultural elements, adapted to specific historical circumstances and regional conditions, processes that enriched Mesopotamian civilization while also preparing the ground for further cultural development as later empires expanded beyond Mesopotamia and encountered additional cultural traditions that would be integrated into increasingly cosmopolitan imperial cultures, creating patterns of cultural synthesis and adaptation that would characterize the development of ancient Near Eastern civilization for many centuries, with Sumerian contributions providing essential foundations for legal, religious, literary, and technological traditions that would influence the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam through shared concepts of divine justice, human responsibility, and cosmic order, while also contributing to Greek philosophy, Roman law, and other intellectual traditions that would shape European civilization, and ultimately global culture through the spread of Western influence during the modern period, demonstrating the remarkable reach and endurance of cultural innovations that were first developed in the city-states of ancient Sumer by people who could hardly have imagined the long-term consequences of their creative achievements, though they clearly understood the importance of preserving knowledge and transmitting cultural values to future generations, as evidenced by their investment in education, their careful preservation of texts and traditions, and their development of institutional mechanisms that could maintain cultural continuity across political changes and social transformations, creating precedents for cultural preservation and transmission that continue to influence contemporary approaches to education, scholarship, and cultural heritage management in societies that face similar challenges in maintaining cultural identity while adapting to changing circumstances and new opportunities. The lasting legacy of Sumerian civilization extends far beyond the temporal and geographical boundaries of ancient Mesopotamia to encompass virtually every aspect of modern urban life, from the fundamental technologies and institutional structures that make complex societies possible, to the intellectual and spiritual traditions that provide meaning and purpose for individual existence, with contemporary scholars continuing to discover new connections between Sumerian innovations and later developments in law, literature, science, technology, and social organization that demonstrate the profound and enduring influence of humanity's first urban civilization, whose creative achievements established precedents and provided foundations that would be built upon, refined, and adapted by successive generations across thousands of years of continuous cultural development, creating cumulative traditions of knowledge and practice that connect modern life with its ancient origins through unbroken chains of transmission, innovation, and adaptation that demonstrate both the continuity of human nature and the progressive character of human achievement, with archaeological research continuing to reveal new aspects of Sumerian culture through ongoing excavations, advanced analytical techniques, and interdisciplinary approaches that combine traditional archaeological methods with scientific analysis of materials, environmental reconstruction, and digital technologies that enable increasingly sophisticated interpretations of ancient remains, leading to constantly evolving understanding of Sumerian society that challenges previous assumptions while confirming the fundamental importance of Sumerian contributions to human development, particularly in areas like urbanization, where Sumerian cities provided the first successful models for organizing large populations and permanent settlements that could support specialized occupations, complex social hierarchies, and sophisticated cultural institutions, establishing patterns of urban development that would be replicated and refined throughout human history as expanding populations required increasingly effective approaches to resource management, social coordination, and cultural expression, with modern cities continuing to face many of the same fundamental challenges that confronted Sumerian urban planners, including infrastructure development, environmental management, social integration, and economic organization. Though the specific technologies and institutional mechanisms have evolved dramatically, the underlying principles of urban design, public administration, and community organization remain remarkably consistent with concepts first developed in ancient Mesopotamia, while the intellectual achievements of Sumerian civilization continue to influence contemporary scholarship through their contributions to mathematics, astronomy, literature, and philosophy, with modern researchers finding that Sumerian innovations in areas like numerical systems, calendrical calculations, and astronomical observations established foundations for scientific development that would prove essential for later achievements in mathematics, physics, and other technical fields, while Sumerian literary works continue to be studied not only for their historical significance, but also for their artistic merit and their exploration of universal themes about human nature, divine purpose, and the meaning of existence that remain as relevant today as they were in the ancient world, ensuring that Sumerian culture will continue to enrich human understanding and inspire creative achievement for generations to come, as new discoveries, fresh interpretations, and changing perspectives reveal additional dimensions of Sumerian accomplishment, while demonstrating the enduring value of ancient wisdom for addressing contemporary challenges and opportunities.